The one legit concern about this rebuild is that it stalls out, but maybe there's a way it can be avoided.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, a contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, my buddy Bez from On Tap Sportsnet put out a tweet that had me thinking there is definitely a hurdle for this rebuild to clear and a legit concern that it could stall out. But there is some ways that can be solved. Then Dylan Cease returns to right field for the first time since being traded last spring. So let's discuss how that trade has aged. And finally, let's discuss if TV play-by-play man John Schriffen deserved his most recent criticism. This episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5 Hour Energy shots. Go to www.5hourenergy.com or Amazon today. All right, so shout out to my buddy Bez of OnTapSportsNet.com. And by the way, him and I, we're going to be down at right field on Sunday. We're going to take in the game together. Got some tickets, so we've become friends, so we're going to go to the game, season finale. I will be down there. Hope to see you there. But he is the inspiration behind this first segment when he tweeted this reaction to Yahoo.com's Russell Dorsey's piece on the White Sox rebuild. And this is basically what he tweets, and I've got it for those watching on YouTube. This is at Bez Beyond the Pen. Moving from 41 to 61 wins is meaningful improvement. Adding another 20 wins is a tougher lift. My fear is they'll stall out somewhere between promising and playoff worthy. And one of the reasons why I'm tackling this is I do keep maintaining the one thing we should have during this rebuild is guarded optimism. There's nothing wrong with enjoying what Kyle Teel and Colson Montgomery and Shane Smith and Edgar Carroll are doing right now. Loving the promises that they've shown, but let's not start planning championship parades just yet. Let's not, start thinking, oh man, I'm going to go talk to some Cubs fans about, hey, enjoy your playoff appearance now because we're going to be even better down the road. Kind of like the smack I think we were all talking in 2018 and 2019 as we were watching that Cubs core erode and the White Sox core from the last rebuild start to emerge. That yielded just 2 playoff wins. And that's why Cubs fans can still laugh at us. But in this case, I think we've learned our lessons as fans. I think the organization has learned some lessons. And it is just having these concerns. They're legit concerns to have, not something to be shouted down. Colson Montgomery and Kyle Teel and Edgar Carroll and Shane Smith and Mike Vassell and Grant Taylor, they all have some developing to do. And, Miguel Vargas, Lenyn Sosa, these young veterans that you could probably say, and Davis Martin that are part of this core, they've got some work to do too. And again, the front office is acknowledging that. I talked about on yesterday's episode. Chris Getz said one of the big things that has to happen is obviously these young guys get better in the offseason, put in the work. Now, it would be nice if they spent a little money, but that's probably not going to happen. But worrying about stalling out can be avoided. I think, basically avoiding the stagnation can happen in 4 ways. 1, continue to follow a good draft process. 2, do better in international free agency. 3, actually develop those guys then. The guys that you draft and sign an international free agency. And 4, actually then make that major trade or free agent signing to acquire a player that puts you over the top. Because that was the clunky stuff in the last rebuild. They didn't follow a good draft process for the most part. They drafted too many high floor guys. International free agent signing. Yeah, they did well with Luis Robert Jr., but pretty much, Yoelqui Cespedes never amounted to anything. That type of stuff. They didn't really develop talent. Or they just reached their floor, and their floor was just not even raised floor players. And then they just never put that final impact piece to put them over the top. Well, they thought they did. Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn thought they did, but they did it in the bargain bin way. They went bargain bin shopping. So what I don't want to see Chris Getz do is go bargain bin shopping. Go get your John Lester, for example. And I know that Jerry is the owner, and I'm going to address it in a second, but actually, the next time a Manny Machado type player's on the free agent market or Bryce Harper, sign that guy. Actually complete the deal. Instead of saying, well, we offered him the most money, you offered him to earn the most money. The Padres actually offered him the most guaranteed money, and that matters. And that, I think, is how this club can avoid leveling off during this rebuild. Because the one thing that I also hope that happens is the development just doesn't stop once these kids reach the majors. Because I think that also happened. I think a lot of the trying to get these guys to get better just stopped. Moncada, stop taking care of himself. Start really putting in the work because he got paid. Same with Eloy. Andrew Vaughn basically never got any better. He actually got worse. He regressed. So I do like what I'm hearing from GM Chris Getz and manager Will Venable that, hey, we know that there's going to be some internal, there has to be internal improvement from these rookies and young veterans. It's still needed. We're going to give them the plan. These are the things we want to work. But then obviously we want to see the results. But what you want to see is guys get better. And that was a huge problem during the last rebuild. Nobody got better, really. Dylan Cease, yeah, he had the 2022 season where he finished runner-up for AL Cy Young and then regressed. We've seen it with Luis Robert Jr. and the health. And I think those are the bars the rebuild needs to clear to actually get back to being competitive. These young guys actually getting better. But then also supplementing the talent. And part of that is you got to draft well and sign well in international free agency. And I've been liking the draft process the last two drafts, or at least mostly in 2024. Again, I still would have rather had Connor Griffin drafted, but Hagen Smith absolutely dominated last night for the Barons in their playoff game. And I'm actually going to talk about that more on Monday. But hey, there might still be something there with Hagen Smith, but still, at least they went back and got Caleb Bonemer. And then this year, you draft Billy Carlson and Jaden Foskey, two young, high-ceiling high school players. And now if you win the number one pick in the MLB draft lottery next year, you can go get Rock Kowalski. Or say you still finish in the top three. You can get a Justin LeBron or a Drew Burgess, a college bat that can, maybe only take a year or two in the minors, but that still have high ceilings. But you got to keep drafting and signing those international free agents to provide those reinforcements down the road to cover for any potential regression or injuries, because that also did not happen. There was never that second wave of talent. There was just the first wave, and that was it. And then we saw what happened when it just leveled off. But most importantly, build up a prospect war chest to use at the trade deadline or in the offseason to pull off moves that put you over the top, like the Padres try to do every year. The team that's coming into town this weekend, they try to do that all the time. They just did that at the trade deadline, pulled off that massive trade for Mason Miller. They traded for Dylan Cease last spring. They acquired Juan Soto. Now, the Padres might not be the best example, considering they still not won a World Series, but they do get to the playoffs. Los Angeles Dodgers, they use their prospect war chest to keep adding guys, and they won a World Series. So we're talking about signing international free agents and drafting those guys to build up that prospect war chest to trade for elite players, because we keep talking about spending in the offseason, but you can use the trade market to get elite players. That is a route, but the key word is elite, not bargain bin decent players like, say, trading for Lance Lynn. Be bold with the trades. Be willing to compete. Your rebuild, complete your rebuild, and not say, well, I only have so much money, so the best I can do in free agency is Dallas Keuchel, Yasmani Grandal, and Liam Hendricks. How about the next go around when the money's authorized? And I do think some money will be authorized. I know you can be skeptical that Jerry may never allow spending while he's the owner for the next 3 years, but I do think he'll increase if he sees the potential title on the horizon. But literally put your eggs in one basket, actually, and then go get Bryce Harper-like talent or a Manny Machado. Stop trying to bargain bin yourself here. That's one way to avoid the stagnation. Well, Dylan Cease was part of a prior core that was supposed to bring a World Series back to the South Side that never happened. He's making his first start at right field since being traded last spring, and let's review how that trade has gone after a couple of the prospects wrapped up their minor league seasons after the break. This episode is brought to you by Zippix Toothpicks. Whether you're looking for nicotine satisfaction or an energy boost, Zippix has you covered with their nicotine and caffeine infused toothpicks. For nicotine users, Zippix provides a discreet way to satisfy cravings and the hand-to-mouth habit without vaping or smoking. Zippix can be a helpful tool as you work to reduce your dependence on vaping. Available in 6 great flavors with 2 milligram and 3 milligram nicotine options. And if you need energy without the crash, their caffeine toothpicks are a game changer. And I know I need to cut down on my coffee and pop intake, so you best believe I'm going to give the caffeine toothpicks a try. Go to zippixtoothpicks.com. Use code LOCKEDON for 10% off your first order. Must be 21 or older to order. Warning, nicotine is an addictive chemical. That's zippixtoothpicks.com. Promo code LOCKEDON. Zip more, smoke less with Zippix toothpicks. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. Well, I do like to check in from time to time to see how trades the White Sox have made has aged. And I figure with Dylan Cease set to return tonight, and Jose Abreu, he's thrown out the first pitch, to pitch against his former team and toe the right field mound for the first time since that spring trade last season. So it's been 2 years since we've actually last seen Dylan Cease pitch at 35th and Shields. I figured I'd do another checkpoint. And it's still advantage San Diego, despite Cease pitching like the 2023 version we saw, basically the last time we saw him pitch for the White Sox, which was up and down, struggling, inconsistent. And he hasn't been obviously the size Cease we saw in 2022 or last year from afar, but still, he has reached 200 Ks for the 5th straight season. And the other reason why it's still advantage Padres is because the White Sox are barely getting anything out of this trade right now. You got Steven Wilson, who pitched so poorly last year, he was actually DFA'd in the offseason. Now, I appreciate him having a bounce-back season after rejoining the 26-man roster this year, but he's also pitching at a level where I wouldn't be upset if the front office found an upgrade over him. I'm not going to be like, man, we definitely got to keep Steven Wilson. He's in the core. No, he's just here basically helping you cover some time. He's decent in, medium and low leverage. I think he's got one of the better average, better ERAs in high leverage, but still it's not great. And I wouldn't say he's actually, dominant. He doesn't miss a ton of bats. So it's like, yeah, if that's a guy that you can upgrade, go upgrade over him. Now, Drew Thorpe, he gave us that 5-start stretch of promise last season where he allowed just 5 runs, but then injuries have derailed everything. There was obviously the offseason setback from the elbow surgery to shave down that bone spur that prematurely ended his 2024 season. And then he needed Tommy John surgery during spring training. And the reason why I'm recounting this is I think we've all forgotten, hey, Drew Thorpe will be back next year. So again, that's going to play a role into the White Sox need to add, maybe 3 veteran starting pitchers. But at the same time, you got to wonder, where does he fit long-term in the organization? The hope is, I believe it was the Barons' former pitching coach. I forgot which podcast I heard on, but the belief was shaving down that bone spur was going to help him get back to his fastball, basically getting to 93, 94, where he can still, his fastball doesn't have a ton of movement. So that's one of the reasons why you want it to be maybe more 93, 94, because if he makes a mistake, there's still a chance, albeit not much, to still miss a bat. But if it's at 90, 91, as you saw, he was getting absolutely tattooed. But he needs to get that fastball to work so he can set up that fantastic changeup. And with that changeup, that still gives him a future with this organization. There was talk that he had one of the best changeups in baseball. That's how good it was. Not just the minors. We're talking about baseball. But you just got to wonder, has he been passed by? They're talking about Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith joining the rotation. You do need to add at least one, veteran, whether you're bringing back Martin Perez, depending on, what happens with his shoulder. Or do you go sign another guy? You still got Sean Burke that could still be viable. So you just wonder, where does he fit? Now, if it's in the bullpen, because he's got the changeup to be an effective reliever, it will mean the centerpiece of this deal will have gone from being a potential right-handed Mark Burley type ace to a high leverage reliever or just a long reliever. That's not exactly maximizing a great trade asset that you had in Cease, like say what the team did with Garrett Crochet. And yes, I'll give you a second to go and dream of, imagine a rotation where the White Sox still had Cease and Garrett Crochet. Imagine an owner that would have paid both of them. But on the flip side, you wouldn't have Kyle Teal, Chase Mydroth, or Wickelman Gonzalez, or Brady Montgomery. So just live in a world where maybe they actually decided to pay Dylan Cease, because they didn't even, I don't even think they made an offer for an extension. And, it was reported that they briefly engaged Garrett Crochet. And when it became abundant, they were never going to pay him the money that he eventually got from Boston. It was, he's getting traded. But they've maximized that trade asset. They have not done that with this trade because they followed bad process. Because Getz was trying to fulfill the owner's wishes of turning things around quickly. So he went for higher floor prospects that at least could get to the show and do something. And again, I'm not saying that that's a knock on Thorpe. It's just losing this time, because again, that's the only downside of Tommy John surgery. He may have been passed up organizationally. And again, you would like to see him have that impact that you're seeing with Kyle Teal or, potentially Brady Montgomery, because he was the centerpiece in the deal. Because the centerpiece of, the White Sox deal that they got from Garrett Crochet, you found basically probably one of your faces of your franchise and potentially the next face of your franchise once he comes up. With this deal, you've got a guy that maybe is your fourth or fifth starter if he returns healthy. There's, if you blink, the very small potential that it could be an ace in the Aaron Nola prior to this year type mold. But otherwise, you're looking at maybe just like I said, a high leverage or long reliever. But at least Samuel Zavala, he raged against the dying of his prospect status. He hit 200, obviously, last year. I think it was 184 he hit, and he dropped out of the team's top 30 prospect list. And this was also a guy that was being considered to be a possible top 100 prospect before the trade happened, overall by MLB Pipeline. And he was so bad that he just completely tumbled out of the rankings. But he at least hits 254 this year, and he climbs back to the White Sox number 28 prospect. Got a lot of respect for him, and I wrote a piece that'll be out tomorrow for SouthsideShowdown.com that, you kind of might want to root for this guy to continue to climb back up as a potential building piece, because he's one of the few center field options they have that might be able to do something in the big leagues. He might be ready by the time the club control runs out on Luis Robert Jr. in 2027. That's if LRJ is not traded by then. But then there's Jairo Iriarte, who's trending towards being a major bust. He went from showing so much promise last season with a 3.71 ERA at Double-A to having the plans to develop him to being a starter just completely scratched this season. They were trying. I like that they were trying to develop him to his ceiling, which was a potential middle of the rotation starter. But when it became clear he couldn't handle just a little bit better hitting, and he couldn't command the ball at all at Triple-A, they're like, okay, we got to go to his floor, which is potentially a high leverage, closer or a high leverage reliever. But he might not even get there. Because think about it, he was so bad in 5 starts in Charlotte. He had to get the Arizona reset. That's, when the team pulled him from game action and sent him to the spring training facility in Glendale, Arizona to work on some mechanics. And that obviously clearly didn't work, because then they returned him to Charlotte and they put him into his, to a bullpen role. And he just can't command the ball. He went, command was a concern for him last year with a 10.7 walk percentage at Double-A. This year, it's an all-out panic at 17.1. That's bad. And if he can't throw strikes in next spring training, I wonder if he gets the same treatment Nick Nastrini and Jake Eder got, which is 2 other pitching prospects acquired in trades who struggled to command the ball, and they didn't get a long runway, and the team eventually moved on. Now, speaking of moving on, Chicago Sun-Times sports media writer Jeff Agrest suggested the club should just move on from TV play-by-play voice John Schriffen, and I want to discuss that after the break. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right means cashing in. With football back, PrizePicks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. And I love how simple and easy of a concept this is. And they run things like Taco Tuesdays, where no, you don't get a taco. Instead, Taco Tuesday consists of several discounted player projections on the board marked with tacos, meaning the more or less is down from what PrizePicks originally has available. They're also running a max discount for this Sunday's game with the more or less on Patrick Mahomes' passing yards being at 0.5. So basically, just has to complete one positive pass. Boom. You're almost halfway there toward cashing in. Download the PrizePick app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. And caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5-Hour Energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shots packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with 0 sugar and 0 crashes. And what I love most is how portable they are. Big taste, tiny shot, and you can take it anywhere and get that boost when you need it. And I know I need to cut down on my coffee and pop intake, so you best believe I'm going to be switching to 5-Hour Energy shots because of how fast it kicks in and that it's sugar-free, so I don't have to worry about crashing later. Also, I can just quickly crack open a 5-Hour Energy shot to get that boost rather than wait for the coffee to be made. You know, it's all about efficiency for me. Enough with boring flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-Hour Energy shots. Get the favorites you love and be bold and try something new in-store or online at www.5hourenergy.com or Amazon today. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever they get their podcasts, as this show's available on all major podcast platforms. Hope you have some fun weekend plans. Mine, as I said in the first segment, I will actually be down at Wright Field on Sunday. I'm going to finally take my first game in, 10 years. I'm going to go with my buddy Bez from On Tap Sportsnet. The White Sox actually has worked out something cool that we're going to be doing together, kind of doing a pilot thing. I don't want to get too much into it until I actually officially figure out everything we're going to be doing on Sunday, but it's really neat what the Sox are thinking of doing. And I do think where the Sox are headed in terms of their marketing and their PR, I think it's actually headed in a way where they deserve a lot of credit. So I can't wait to get down there. So hopefully I'll see you guys down there. You know, maybe you'll see me getting a hot dog, that type of stuff. Let's say hi, you know, that type of stuff. If you don't like me, just, you know, if you don't like my takes, hey, we don't have to be jerks. We can have a conversation, that type of stuff as well. All right. So I've been mostly neutral on John Schriffen, and I know he can be very polarizing. And I've definitely seen the reaction to Jeff Agrest's recent column he had in the Chicago Sun-Times about Schriffen. Now, one of the reasons why I'm neutral is I agree that he has cringeworthy moments, and he still has them this year. And I think he is definitely struggling to still get being a baseball TV announcer down. And I do think he made a huge mistake just focusing on building up goodwill from the fans. He should have also reached out to the media. I mean, I know it was going to be a tough uphill battle because Jason Benetti was so well connected in the media. I mean, he was a former score intern. You know, he had some relationships definitely on the score. But even on ESPN radio, you know, I remember when he had that kind of that tiff with Parkins and Spiegel, even ESPN radio, Catman and Hood were saying like, dude, you got to play the game. There's nothing wrong with, you know, coming on the shows and building relationships with media personalities. I think he could have done both, but I do think it was a smart decision for him to embrace the fans. You know, I know the Lot B crowd has become mostly on his side. You know, the shy, you know, shy sots, the shy sports bums, they love him. I know a lot of the people that, you know, you see on social media think that Schriffen's really cool, that he's willing to come out to those tailgates, hang out with the fans, that type of stuff. And the main reason, though, and I try to be fair, and this is why I'm trying to be neutral to him, is he's basically broadcasting to an audience of one. And that's not it's not meant to say that he's only broadcasting to the one person watching White Sox baseball. on TV, which seems to basically be me. Kidding, by the way. And more people are watching, but obviously the ratings were not very well. And that's not to say he's broadcasting to an audience of one because the ratings are bad. He's broadcasting basically to Jerry Reinsdorf. I mean, when you kind of read between the lines of why the White Sox let Jason Benetti go, and then that Athletic article that came out last September about how involved Reinsdorf still is with the organization, especially like with the details of the broadcast, I've come to the conclusion the broadcasts are meant for owner Jerry Reinsdorf. At least the play-by-play. So I tend to pay more attention to what Steve Stone has to say or Dan Plesac when he fills in, because they're at least trying to explain what is happening on the field. They're still trying to give me those little details that, their better trained eye. And I prefer Plesac and Stoney. I'm not a huge fan of Beckham. I just think, Beckham, he's probably better suited to like a studio analyst role. It doesn't seem natural for him to be an analyst, where Plesac and Stoney's probably one of the best of all time, in my opinion. And I'll die on that hill. I listen to them, but I will say Schriffen's calls have not been that bad this season to where it raises to the level of a scathing piece that Agrest wrote in the Sun-Times, basically calling for Schriffen to be replaced. And here's just a nugget of what Agrest wrote. As the Sox become worth watching, they need an announcer worth listening to. The organization should replace Schriffen after the season, and there's a feeling the Sox might. Schriffen hasn't clicked with lead analyst Steve Stone, which is a must. He seems more at ease with Beckham and Dan Plesac. Can you imagine him trying that hot dog stunt with Stone? Sidebar, so Agrest leads with this cringeworthy stunt segment that Schriffen tried with Beckham that obviously was a little cringy, but back to the piece. The two of them generally don't have conversations. They take turns talking. Schriffen doesn't set up Stone enough to tap into his extensive knowledge of the game. In fact, Schriffen tries to be an analyst himself. He talks so much about pitching that he takes away from Stone. Schriffen doesn't believe in brevity. Count how many times he says the innings during a game. Yes, announcers give the count, outs, and scores, even with the score bug on the screen. But it's like a tick for Schriffen, who once said it was the top of the ninth inning 10 times with 6 batters. He's not prepared enough for broadcast. His preparation amounts to hearing what the team tells him and then regurgitating without adding any depth. He leans into vibes and uses cliches instead of providing useful research. He talks about the players needing a reset or being locked in as if they're robots simply pushing a button. Schriffen is excessively positive and makes outlandish statements. It's as though he's trying to sell you something. He called Miguel Vargas a star when he's hitting 225. This week, while explaining Shane Smith's success with his fastball, he said, quote, "That's why he's one of the best in the game right now," end quote. He may have played baseball at Dartmouth, but he needs to learn more about it to broadcast. He has said sac fly RBI, a redundancy that offends one's baseball sensibilities, and he called a player a pinch hitter when he had already entered the game for defense. Instead of wandering the right field parking lots, trying to endure himself to fans, Schriffen should have used that time to prepare for broadcast, learn about Sox history, and pick the brains of other broadcasters. Wow! That is taking the driver, man, and just, whoa. I mean, I don't think Schriffen deserved that treatment. I'll be fair to him on that. And the one thing I'll push back on, too, is I do realize it's happened less this season, but last year, Schriffen was relying a ton on Stoney. He was pitching a ton of questions to get Stoney to talk. And also, Stoney's a teacher of the game. He explains baseball. He doesn't always converse it. And that's not a dig at Stoney. The man's been one of my baseball teachers since I was a little kid. But his role has kind of been to be the teacher because he worked, for example, with Harry Carey. Harry provided the entertainment. Harry provided the colorfulness. Stoney provided the explanation. Now, if you want a conversation guy, yes, Hawk Harrelson, he was great at having those conversations with Tom Paciorek. Not so much with Steve Stone, obviously. And Jason Benetti, he was great at it too. But we're talking about a TV broadcast. I can see what's going on, so I don't need conversations in my broadcast to fill the time. I need information to help guide my eyes. I need context. And yes, sometimes I think Schriffen still falls very short. But conversations, that's for radio. Okay? And maybe that's why I'm also indifferent to Schriffen, because when he's gotten cringy or sounding like he's an excited puppy, I can turn on Len and DJ's radio broadcast. I have options. The TV broadcast, the option basically is make it appealing to the owner. And John is clearly willing to do that. So that's why he jumped in line to get that spot without ever doing like a minor league stint and that type of stuff. Although Agrest did point out a new leader is at CHSN, and we've seen Jerry's loyalty can be manipulated if someone can show him, hey, this is hot garbage. like Chris Getz after the 121 loss season, basically Getz saying, hey, the way things were running things is hot garbage. Let's modernize. And I'm not saying Schriffen is hot garbage, but objectionably, he is replacement level. Okay, no matter how much you like that he's calling out to these tailgates, he's at best a replacement level broadcaster. And if a network that is trying to draw in subscribers to pay that higher tier on Comcast to access the channel or the direct-to-consumer streaming, yeah, CHSN might want more than a replacement level to help draw in viewers, although a better team would take care of that too. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night, every game, every night until a World Series champion's crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or every listen to your podcast. And again, I'll be back on Monday with another minor league Monday report and maybe some surprise interviews. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion on the community page on YouTube. Email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or you can leave them at X, formerly Twitter, at LockedOnSox or at Todd J. Dub. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you Monday.